We're now live on YouTube, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon and welcome to everyone to this meeting of the Planning Policy Committee. Once again, it is delightful to see you all here in person. It goes without saying, as I see you already all have, very happy for everyone to be as relaxed and as casual as you feel it needs to be, because it's an incredibly hot day, and despite us having got the windows open in here, it's still quite warm, and I would prefer you not to pass out during the course of today's proceedings. We'll move swiftly on to item 1, which is apologies for absence, please.
Chair, there are 3 apologies for absence from Councillor Tony Howard, from Councillor Steve Macmillan and Councillor Jimmy Brooks. There are also 2 substitutions today. Councillor David Hall is substituting for Councillor Howard and Councillor Terry Aldridge is substituting for Councillor Macmillan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 2 is disclosures of interest. If anyone has any, please let me know. If you haven't, if anything comes up in the meeting, let me know then. Item 3 is the minutes of the meeting held 10th of June, pages 1 to 34 of our papers. I'm assuming we've all had opportunity to have read them. Are you happy for me to go ahead and sign those at a point shortly after today's meeting? Seeing no dissent, I'm happy to do that. 4 actions from the last meeting. Item 5, pages 37. Simon, are you taking us through those?
I can do, but I'm just trying to locate them. If you just bear with me a moment, Chairman. My apologies for the slight delay on that. Yes, I'll quickly run through the ones that are on there. I will look at the ones that are in red, really, that have actions on them. In terms of the good homes, as you can see on there, this is actually in hand. Director of Wellbeing is actually looking at that. If you remember that they did a presentation at the last committee. And equally for the next one as well, the working group will be set up again in conjunction with the Assistant Director for Housing and Wellbeing. SP5, this will actually form part of the overall review. I think I did mention that in the meeting as well. SP5, which looks at housing for older people, that will actually form part of the review process. So SP5 will be looked at that will be fed into from the outcomes of the working group. The statistics are available. It's in hand as put in there. Not had a chance to actually locate any just yet, but I will feed back when I do. The working group for settlement pattern and point structure. In the last committee meeting, we did discuss this briefly at the end. The membership of the working group has now been decided, so we can move forward with setting that up. So that is in hand. We'll be discussing that with the membership of the group and sorting out some dates and agenda for that meeting and for that working group. I believe a brief has already been carried out and circulated to members through the members' point brief for the next one. Moving on to 21, the letter that is to go to the MP has now been drafted. We have a final draft of that, which has been looked over and confirmed as acceptable. So that will be signed off and that will be sent through to the MP. Those two items, that all sort of forms part and parcel of the same thing on there. Don't think there's any more actions that required updates on there, as far as I can tell. So I'll hand back to you, Chairman, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Do members have any point would like to pick up on that? Councillor Smith, please.
I'm ever sorry, I couldn't make out those last couple of points. Simon broke up a little bit, and I wondered if we could just.
Yeah, I'm happy to confirm. I know what Simon was speaking of there. It's the letter to members of Parliament from. Just go back to it, which we discussed. I think we did mention it briefly at the last meeting, but we discussed it at the meeting before. Just to confirm that that has been drafted and sent, or it's awaiting a signature to send, but we've approved that today.
Thank you.
Has anyone got any other bits on actions? Seeing no one, then I'm happy for us to move on to item 5, which is the presentation on first homes and the report. And I'll hand over to Mr. Murphy, who very kindly joins us again electronically to guide us through this. So, Alex, I'll hand over to you, please. You're muted, I'm afraid.
Apologies. Thank you, Chairman. The report in front of you today is intended to give a brief overview of the government's first home policies. On the 24th of May 2021, the Housing Minister set out the policy changes in relation to first homes and the associated revision of the planning practice guidance. The introduction of first homes reflects the government's commitment to ensuring an adequate and varied supply of housing, especially for those wishing to step onto the housing ladder. First homes are a specific kind of affordable housing and basically are a kind of discounted market sale housing. So in terms of planning, they are actually regarded as an affordable house type. To be regarded as a first home, it must be discounted at a minimum of 30% against the market value of the property, sold to a person or persons meeting the first home's eligibility criteria. On their first sale, have restrictions registered on their title to ensure that the discount as a percentage and any other restrictions is passed on to any subsequent title transfer. And finally, that they are discounted. The final sale price must not be more than 250,000 outside of London. On that note, whilst the national cap outside of London is 250,000, as a local authority, we can actually adjust that if local circumstances apply. What that does mean, though, is any other subsequent sales of that property will not be affected by that cap. So effectively, after the first sale, the cap is removed, but the percentage discount will always remain in perpetuity. So if we choose a discount, say, of 40 to 50% off the market value, that will remain on that property, but the initial sale price of, say, 230 would be lifted after its first sale. In terms of the price cap, sorry, I'm just trying to read my notes, there's quite a lot of detail on them. As a market, housing market, East Lindsey currently, as of March 2021, had a price of about 200,000. And whilst it is suggested that first homes are indistinguishable from those of open market in terms of their size and build quality, the national price cap shouldn't be seen as justification for delivery of more expensive properties. So obviously that's something we need to bear in mind as an authority when we're looking at any potential cap or discount. The government actually see first homes as being their preferred choice when it comes to discounts for market tenure, and they're actually expecting at least 25% of all housing units to be delivered as first homes, and they're wanting us to deliver those through Section 106 planning obligations. In terms of eligibility criteria, purchase of first homes, whether they be individuals, couples or group purchasers, would not be expected to have an income, a combined income, sorry, of more than 80,000 in the tax year before purchasing the first home. It's also expected they will have a mortgage of 50% of the discounted purchase price in place at the time of the purchase. And these national standards will also apply to any future sale of that property. Along with the national eligibility criteria, as part of the Section 106 agreement, local authorities or neighbourhood planning groups can also apply lower income caps, for example, if they're justified with reference to local average first-time buyers' wages. Other possible criteria could also include local connection criteria, employment status, just being a few. Any local eligibility criteria, though, which has been applied, will only last for 3 months from when the home is first marketed. Basically, that's to safeguard the developer insofar as if the property was sat on the market and they couldn't find a suitable buyer, after 3 months, those local criteria would be removed and effectively would be left with the national criteria just in place. Along with any local eligibility criteria, along with the Section 106 agreement, we'll also have to have a mortgagee exclusion criteria clause. That's effectively there to protect the lenders and encourage competitive lending rates. We are expecting the government to produce a template, which we hope to have in due course, which will actually show us the way forward on that. But it's likely to require that mortgage companies recover their funds through the sale after non-repayment, and any monies left over will be returned to the local authority in lieu of the loss of the first home. The government is also seeking to deliver first homes through the exception route, site route. So local planning authorities are required to support the development on exception sites where it's for first-time buyers, unless we can demonstrate that we actually have a sufficient supply through the local plan allocations. First homes really is going to play quite an important part in the local plan review. There are transitional arrangements in place, but they don't really apply to East Lindsey because we're not quite far enough on in the review of the plan. What we can say at this point, though, is sites with full or outline planning permissions already in place or determined before 28th of December 2021 won't be affected. Applications for full or outline planning permission where there has been significant pre-application engagement, which are determined before 28th of March 2022, and sites where local or neighbourhood plans are adopted, made under or transitional agreements won't be affected either. And that's basically all we know at the present time. We're going to have quite a lot of in-depth work into the ramifications of all this, obviously, because with the government wanting 25% of all affordable housing to actually be first homes, we're going to have a look at the balance and see how that affects over affordable tenures. I think that really covers the basis of it, as we know at the minute.
Thank you very much. Could you possibly...
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I could just hear myself coming back there. Thank you very much, Alex, for that presentation. I don't know if anyone else wants to add from on the screen, but I'm very happy to open it up for debate by members of the committee. I mean, it strikes me as being it feels another one of those burdens which government is putting on the planning system to deliver policy outcomes. And this is on top of existing requirement to provide out of the same amount of value that we have in land and in development, requirements to put into education, into NHS and everything else. But at the same time, it does appear to have been pretty well thought through. And I personally support and can see the logic of the of the purpose of this, but I'd certainly be interested to hear your views. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I think this appears to be, as the chair says, a fairly well thought out piece of work. It mentions in section 2.1c that there are certain other restrictions, and you did mention local restrictions. I wasn't sure if you meant by local restrictions restrictions that the local authority had put in place, or whether you meant we could have restrictions which were these homes are for local people, and that sort of criteria for the sale of the homes, and whether and when you said that the those local restrictions only lasted for 3 months, I was wondering if that included sort of a lowering of the overall price that you mentioned. If we'd initially said 40%, I'd like to think all these things were in perpetuity, but you can fill me in on that, possibly, maybe not. And the other thing is, when does this all come into power? Should we be considering this now? Can we start, considering it now? Or I see in the papers that it was sort of approved in May, but is it already on the books, as it were? Thank you.
Right. With regards to the criteria, effectively, can I just clarify? It was paragraph 2.1 you were referring to. Is that?
Yeah, there's just a bit that says that there are certain other restrictions, and I just wondered what those other restrictions might be, and whether or not they could be things like local homes for local people, basically.
Yeah, it's the local connections criteria, and sort of we can put a income. I don't know how to best phrase it, but yeah. So local connections criteria. You've got. I did have it on my notes, but I've, as usual, misplaced them. Lower income caps. So obviously that would be, you'll be looking at your first-time buyers' incomes within the district, because obviously the £250,000 cap is a nationwide cap, and obviously East Lindsey is very different, say, from Oxford, which obviously falls without side of the London 490,000 cap. The 3 months, that is set in legislation as far as we are aware currently. The ministerial statement said the 3 months cap would apply. So unfortunately, if the property doesn't sell or no one's reserved the property within those 3 months, any local criteria that we have placed on it or any neighbourhood plan has placed on that property would be removed.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to be clear, that reverts from your local criteria, it reverts to the standard national criteria after those 3 months, which sits there in perpetuity. And I'm assuming on that basis then that the local criteria, is that reapplied at every time a property comes up for market, or if it's reverted once to national criteria, does it stay on national criteria?
The guidance isn't clear on that. It's something we would have to have a look more in depth into. Yeah, they say there is no mention of that. My understanding would be that it would be removed in perpetuity, however, much in the same ways, obviously, the initial price cap would be removed after its first sale. I can't imagine that we'd be able to revert back to previous 3 month criteria after its first initial sale.
Okay, that seems quite interesting, because if we're looking at something that keeps these properties available in as a form of affordable housing in perpetuity, if we're looking at applying local criteria, providing that local criteria is able to be met, it seems a shame that every time it comes up for sale thereafter, our local criteria wouldn't apply, assuming if we decided that we wanted to put any on. Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that would apply, obviously, is the discount cap. So obviously, if we put 50% on that property, that 50% would remain.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor McNally, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I know at Manby there's some housing that was just recently built, and there's an 80% cap on that. And that, I think that was done through a 106 agreement. I'm not entirely sure, and that was a local connection criteria. But some of the ones that are sort of like Manby, can they qualify for the first homes? Instead of having the government criteria, can we use the ones like that we've got at Manby that are 80% and say actually we've already got the 25% of the first homes, if that kind of makes sense?
Go for it, Alex.
It's something we'd have to look into. I couldn't give you an answer off the cuff, I'm afraid. It's not something obviously the legislation is very new to us all, and like I say, there's a lot more in-depth research need to be done on it. I've searched online, other than the national guidance, very few companies have even done any sort of updates on it or made any kind of reference to it yet. So I think we're all a bit into the dark of it at the minute, right? So I could definitely go away and do some more research on that. And obviously, if it's something that members would like, could bring another paper back in the future with a bit more clarity on a few of the points raised today.
I'd say, for my part, despite my initial reservation that this is something else that is being piled on us, I think it's probably a good thing to be piled on to us, insofar as first-time buyers, if we're able to offer houses to people that are buying for the first time, perhaps they're more likely to stay local and keep their talent local and to keep their contribution to the local economy there. So I think it would be useful to keep this coming back to committee as we know more. Sort of a question, a query from me would, and maybe this is something to pick up when we've had a chance to look into it a bit further, is around how we monitor it over the lifetime, or as it is in perpetuity, of a property, how we keep tabs on when it's being marketed and make sure that when it changes hands in the future, maybe the second, third, fourth time it might change hands, that the price caps and discount remain with that property, and we don't lose sight of it or lose it from the system somehow.
The restrictions actually, as part of Section 106, would have to be registered with the land registry themselves. Obviously, they will remain on that property title until such point they are removed by other means. So in terms of that, they should remain on the property. I take your point with regards to the monitoring. That's something as a department we could look into a bit further as well. I think really it would depend on how many we get coming forward as well, as much as anything, to the difficulty in monitoring these. If it's a case of periodically just checking online, maybe if they're actually for sale or not. But as I say, they will be registered in any case with the land registry, and the discounted threshold will be on the deeds of that property. So mortgage companies and the like will be made aware of those.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate 25% of all affordable housing units delivered by developers. If these are first homes, that is soon going to be quite a significant number of houses built up, and that will need keeping tabs on. But has anyone else got any other points that they'd? Councillor Dennis, please.
Yeah, just one question to the officer. Could the criteria of how these things are tracked, although there would be the land registry, could they not be put on the deeds? Or is that not possible? Or would they be on the deeds already?
I'd envisage they would be on the deeds of the property, but again, the legislation isn't particularly clear on the finer points at this point and at this moment in time. Again, it's something I can go away with and find some further information when it's made available to us.
Chairman, if I could just come in and answer one or 2 points, if that helps.
Of course.
Yeah, certainly. I think, as Alex has been alluding to, it is very new legislation, although it is very detailed for legislation for a change and gives us lots of information. There are still quite a few uncertainties with it. Because of that, we are currently commissioning a piece of work jointly with Boston to actually look specifically into the implications relating to first homes and the delivery of first homes in East Lindsey and Boston. It's a consultant potentially that's already done some work for us on housing, so already knows our housing figures. So that is in the process of being done. So that will give us a lot more answers, hopefully. And I know that they are doing similar pieces of work for other councils across the country as well. So it's not just us that are trying to feel our way around this at the moment. We're trying to get some consistency and some understanding through some extra work. So obviously, once we have that done, we can feed that back to committee. In terms of monitoring, absolutely, it's something that does need doing, but I would envisage it being no different to how we monitor our existing Section 106 commitments. We do monitor those on a regular basis. So I can see that sort of being picked up as part of that work on a monthly basis or an ongoing basis. In terms of the question about the deeds, my understanding is that effectively nationally we're moving away from the paper deeds, and this is all registered with the land registry on the title for the property at the land registry. So if you pick up any title relating to a property, it will have various clauses on it, and if it's a Section 106 agreement that requires those clauses to be entered onto that title, it's very easy and no different to now. If you buy a property and you carry out a search on that property, it should flag up any restrictions on that property that are already there, on the deeds, whether there's any restricted planning conditions, etc., through a local authority search or through a search company. So that should be picked up at the point the conveyancing is being carried out. The only other thing, if I may, I did actually have some calculations just to try and illustrate the number of first homes that are likely to be required on a particular site. So if you've got a site that's for 100 houses, 25% of those 100 houses need to be affordable. So that's 25 that need to be affordable. Out of that 25% and the 25% of those need to be first homes. So out of that 25 affordable homes, 6 of those need to be first homes. And the rest, the remaining 15, will be whatever our usual proportion is on a site, affordable rent, shared ownership. So as I say, out of a total site capacity of 100 homes, 6 of those will be required to be first homes under this scheme. So that just gives you a bit of hopefully perspective, and it quantifies it a little bit more, so you understand the sort of levels of first homes that are likely to be provided or required to be provided on sites. Thanks, Chairman. That was just a few little things I wanted to raise.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hall, then Councillor Smith, please.
Okay, just a small question. Would these also be on retrospective planning applications, say a large development which has got permission already, but hasn't actually started building yet? Would it actually be included in there as well?
No, it won't. No.
Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you. It's just a query for Simon, really. Well, for either of you. In terms of those 6 houses in our development of 100, do we as a council or does the planning committee have some sort of way of saying which 6 houses they're going to be? If one end of the development is near the school and the other is nowhere near and is near, the dangerous woods or whatever, and you put the affordable housing at one end, or the first buy houses at one end where they're less likely to sell, you can see that developers might choose to make the wrong decision rather than the right decision. I wondered if we could just, and that goes for the types of houses as well, whether we have, just 2-bedroom houses or perhaps 3-bedroom as well included in that. So do we have a say in which houses they are?
I don't mind picking that up, Alex. over the last few years, there has been a move away from the old way of doing things, and as you say, putting the affordable housing in a particular location, all of it grouped together, and potentially it would be of a different style, different construction, and a lot more now. The emphasis is on making sure that affordable housing is indistinguishable from the rest of the housing on the estate, but also that it is. The phrase that's used is pepper potted, but effectively it is just sort of in different locations. So you might get a pair of semis there, a couple of detached over there, maybe a little block of terrace at the back. So the idea is that it should be completely indistinguishable, and it should be pepper potted around. So it should be a development as a whole, rather than segregating off different elements and different types of housing. So that's already built into the way we actually do things at the moment anyway. And that's something that will be looked at by the planning officers and members of the planning committee, like you say, Councillor Smith, to make sure that is actually happening on a particular development before a decision is even made. So I suspect, and obviously this is not me prejudging, but I suspect that when you do look at planning applications in planning committee, you wouldn't be able to tell which were the affordable housing units unless someone was actually pointing them out to you.
Thank you. If I could just ask something which is sort of essentially unrelated to the paper that you've presented, then the other thing that I think is necessary. I mean, I think this is a great paper, particularly for small villages and things like that, where you have difficulty keeping young people or bringing young people back to the village and to the community, even where they want to come back. But I think there's also a need for last homes in a way, which sounds like a bleak phrase. But you get a lot of people living in big houses who want to stay in their village where they've got a community and don't have sheltered housing, bungalows and things like that to move into. So those people in those first houses end up having to move away anyway, because the big houses for larger families are taken up with old people who would rather be in smaller homes in those communities as well. Maybe this is something that goes with the SP5 things that we were mentioning in the actions, but I just think it's one of those things which could do with looking at affordable housing at both ends of the spectrum, and a nice flow of housing for our communities. I don't know if you've got anything to say on that whatsoever, but I realise it's not really connected to the paper. But thank you,
Chairman. If I'm okay to respond to that.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, you're quite right, and that's something that we were talking about at the last policy committee meeting, where we were talking about homes for life and looking at homes for older generations, where you can move in and those homes are adaptable and then they can be lived in to I mean, we have to be blunt about it, to the end of your life. That's the point of it. So yes, we are looking at planning policy. And planning in general has to look at providing housing for everyone. So that's looking across the spectrum in terms of ages, in terms of all the other types of needs that people have in relation to housing. So yes, that's the work that we would look under SP5 and through that working group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's relevant at 4.1 in the paper on page 39. It does make clear that first home should be physically indistinguishable from the equivalent market homes in terms of quality and size, which I hope gives a degree of reassurance. Councillor Dickinson, did I see you waving earlier or not? No, not wanting to miss anyone. Has anyone got any other point that they'd like to pick up on this? I think we've given it a good debate, and I think there's a lot of positives to be recognised in this, and a degree of confidence that well managed the system will deliver a housing resource for people who genuinely need it. With that, we're here to note the paper. I think we can say that we have done that suitably, and obviously, as we know more, as further developments of this policy area come forward, they'll come back to this committee and we will look at them then in due course. So I'll take that as noted, and we'll move on to, thank you very much for your presentation on that, Alex. It covered a lot of detail, and I'm pleased to see a lot of the queries that I had and I think other members had were already covered in the detail of the report. So thank you very much for that. Moving on to agenda item 6 is the issues and options consultation feedback. And I think, Simon, am I right in thinking you're taking us through this one?
Yes, I am, Chairman. Thank you. Right, so the purpose of this paper really is to just give members a bit of an update and some feedback on some of the responses that we've had in the issues and options exercise. I hope you'll recall that earlier in the year, around February time, we carried out the issues and options consultation exercise. It's known as a Regulation 18 consultation, so it's a formal consultation that we do have to do. One was carried out previously as part of the original local plan work. Members were involved with the actual paper, the actual issues and options paper, which was actually then sent out to people. Significant amount of stakeholders involved. I think we sent out over 1,000 letters, emails, etc., and other forms of advertising as well across the district to make sure that as many people had the opportunity to engage with us and give us their views and opinions on the key issues that we felt the district was facing. And again, members will recall, we talked through that and introduced the idea of the different sets of policies and whether we were doing a partial review, a full review, or no review of the policies. I will just stress that I'm not making any recommendations through this report of which options are preferable. The idea is it's purely at this stage a statistical report, an update of what we have had back. So as I say, there shouldn't be any opinion in there, and I'll do my best not to put any opinion in there at all. The idea is that this is only one element of all of the evidence that goes into how we move forwards with our housing strategy. So we have things like the economic viability assessment, which looks at our affordable housing. We have our housing market assessment, which looks at housing need as well. We have all the corporate priorities in terms of growth agendas around the district as well. So all of that, including the issues and options, will feed into how we look at what is the most appropriate strategy going forwards for our housing delivery. That work will be carried out over the summer and into the early autumn. And the aim is that in the early autumn time, we should be in a position where we can actually come back to policy committee with some more concrete ideas and recommendations as to which are the most appropriate strategies we feel based on the evidence to go forwards with the review of the local plan. That said, I will just go on and go quickly through some of the statistics that we've got here. You'll note at 1.3 there were only 61 respondents to the issues and options paper. Now that does include members of the public, business owners and stakeholders such as statutory stakeholders such as Environment Agency, non-statutory ones, Natural England. So that's all of those responses. There is no requirement for those respondents to actually answer every question either. So some of them will only have answered the ones that they felt were the most appropriate to them. Excuse me. I will just mention before we go into them, just to refresh, there were three main areas we were looking at in the issues and options paper. So we were asking the question, is it appropriate to extend the time of the local plan to 2041? To give the plan a longer lifetime, because we have to give it a minimum of 15 years anyway. The second question was, do you agree with the table of policies that sets out which policies are going to have a full review, which are going to be partial, and which maybe just a very light touch look at? So they're asked, do they agree with that or not? And then the third main question was looking at the housing distribution across the district. So we were looking at the housing split and whereabouts that should be distributed. So those were the three main areas that they were asked to comment on. I'll go quickly through it just to pull out some key statistics there. Question A, looking at the timescale of the plan, you can see there's just over 80% there that felt that the extension of the timescale was appropriate to run it to 2041. And then looking at question B, which was the scope of the policies to be reviewed, as I say, whether a full, partial or no significant review. 51 respondents there, which is about 76, just over 76%. They were satisfied with how we'd set out which policies we were aiming to review. Question C, that looked at whether the coastal split was actually needed. So at the moment, as members will be aware, we have a split between inland and coastal housing and different approaches in terms of how housing is provided in those two areas in the local plan. And the question was, do you feel that this should continue and we still have that split, or should we look at a combined overall housing strategy for the district that doesn't have that split? There are actually only 31 people that responded to those options. Oh no, sorry, I've jumped down a question, my apologies. 42 respondents to that question. 69.6% of respondents said the coastal split should be retained. And then the remainder, roughly 30%, supported C2, which was not to have a coastal split at all. What happens after that? The questions actually split themselves. So if you said, yes, we want a split, you go on to a separate set of questions. And if you said, no, we don't want a split, then you go down a different route to a different set of questions. So the options under question D, that was if the split was to be retained and we keep the split as we are, or still have a split, not necessarily as it is at the moment, but still keep a split. 31 people responded, and you can see that it's difficult to quantify, but the most popular option was D4, restrain growth to natural population growth, 48.4% there. D2, settlement hierarchy led by the town, second most popular at 22.5%. So that's out of the 31 respondents. Moving on, looking at excuse me, the inland options with the coastal split. Settlement hierarchy led by towns was the popular option, as it says there, 57.25 support it, and the three other options were similar, with a similar sort of numbers supporting the other options that were available there. So different levels of distribution down to a full dispersal wherever people wanted to put houses. And then finally, the other set of questions was if there wasn't a coastal split. And we had just a set of policies that covered the whole district. You can see in there again it was it was all fairly evenly distributed, a fair mix. Unrestrained development, 24.14% there, bringing in the highest number, and 17.24% for the other options there as well. Now, underneath each of the questions, there were boxes allowing the respondents to actually put in their own suggestions and also to explain and elaborate why they've actually chosen the options that they did. That processing is still going on because that element takes a lot of time to go through and just read through them all and understand what they were saying. Some of them have written quite lengthy responses. What I will also say is that some of the statutory and non-statutory stakeholders haven't actually chosen preferred options. They have just submitted comments. I suspect that's because they wanted to remain impartial in terms of not choosing a route and influencing the direction, but needed to actually feed back additional comments on the overall options that were there. So all of that work is going on in the background now, assessing and going through all of those different comments that have come back as well, which also provide valuable information. I think, as I've said before, we with the best will in the world, we try and come up with what we feel are the best options. The same with committee, but there's a lot of people out there with brains who may come up with different ideas that we hadn't even thought of. So it's useful to have that additional qualitative feedback as well to give us that information. That's effectively it in terms of giving you a summary of where we're at the moment. As I said, work will progress and there will be more information brought back to committee as and when it's required. But ultimately, towards the autumn period, certainly we'll be in a better position to actually bring back some firm options for the committee members to discuss. That's all from me at the moment. Thank you, Chairman. So I hand back to you.
Thank you very much. Would you mind? Thank you very much. I'll start by saying that 61 respondents out of the number of people who were contacted is incredibly disappointing and somewhat derisory. I appreciate these things tend to be quite dry, but the messaging that I think we have been fairly consistent with is that this is the time, this is the blueprint end of doing the local plan. This is the stage at which people need to be telling us loud and clear how they see it developing, how they see it going forward. And with 61 respondents, I'm not sure it really amounts to being particularly representative of a broad of a particularly broad section of the district. That saying, I'm pleased to see 17.24% of respondents were at least interested in my idea of Poundbury on Wold. But I'll open it up to debate. Who would like to go on this one? Councillor Grover, first to go, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, like yourself, 61 response. It's a pretty miserable response rate. I wonder if it's got anything to do with the fact of obviously the dates. I think that was partially the second lockdown. I know a couple of my parish councils, I hope, filled it in. They said they were going to fill it in. Was slightly unsure whether they were filling it in as a parish council or whether they were able to fill it in as residents. That's something to note for future reference. Obviously, it's been sent out to 1,400 contacts, and Simon mentioned that it was put out on other different channels and stuff. I don't recall seeing anything of this in the local papers or anything. So again, for future reference, I think even an interview with yourself or getting it out on radio, because I mean, 61 respondents is woeful. A question, I suppose the question would be, out of the 61 respondents, do we have a breakdown of what they are? The mixture of residents and the statutory constitutees. That would be useful to understand, I suppose.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll come back if I may, Chairman. Yes, certainly. There was quite a bit of discussion about the timing of it, with it being in lockdown. Absolutely. What we've found and what the message coming out of central government has been all the way through the lockdowns and the dealing with COVID is that local authorities really need to continue and push on with the local plan process. Adamant that planning underpins and effectively underpins and certainly is a great assistance to the recovery of COVID. So we had to try and find a way to actually carry on with the local plan process. As I mentioned before, this is a very significant consultation, something we have to do as part of it. What we found at previous consultations, we held actual open days, drop-in days across the district, and they were incredibly poorly attended back then. So the physical open days, which again were advertised, I'll go on to the advertising in a moment, incredibly poorly attended. So it was felt that in actual fact, there probably was little value in actually having those. And that was something that in light of what was going on with COVID, we could make an exception in this case and not have those actual physical open days. What we did was we had an extended consultation period. So we had it for 8 weeks as opposed to 6 weeks. We actually were flexible over that end date as well, because even with those 8 weeks, there were parish councils and other stakeholders that were still concerned in those timescales that they could get a response, because they were having to have virtual meetings and it was harder for them to actually meet as well. So we had an extended consultation period, and as I say, we were flexible over the timescales that people could respond by as well. It was advertised in the paper. It would have been in the target, so that's a requirement, so that it was in the target the paper. We don't go across every single paper. It's something that potentially we could look at, and certainly other forms of media. We did use that, so there were Facebook posts on it. I had training sessions. Well, I invited every single parish and town council to a training session, and a large number did come to a training stroke briefing session effectively, where I explained the whole issues and options consultation process and what their role was, and then asked them also to assist with the advertising in their local areas, so using their own sort of council websites, parish town council websites, and any mail shots they might sort of use as well. That's some. I think there were other bits of consultations that went on as well. So we tried to actually reach as many people as we could. As I say, a lot of letters were also sent out as well, because we had physical addresses for people, and people don't always use electronic communication. So yes, in terms of COVID, it was very difficult, but we were under instruction effectively from central government to keep pushing forward with local plans and get them reviewed or get them adopted, and we've tried to sort of do the best we can, but I will say that the last issues and options consultation that we did, the turnout was also very low as well, and I think it's something that is a common theme in the planning system, not just with us, across the country as well, that engagement at this early stage is something that is usually pretty low. The breakdown that you mentioned, Councillor, yes, very good point, and certainly that's something can have a look at, and the breakdown between, as you say, members of the public bodies and such like, and possibly businesses as well, if we can pick those out. So I'll certainly have a look at that breakdown, and we can circulate that for you. I think, or I hope that answers some of your questions anyway, if I could pass back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did Councillor McNally?
Thank you, Chairman. So there's not much to really say on the report, but I look forward to seeing the end recommendation, and hopefully we won't see any sort of stuff where it's 42, 58% or something. Just out of interest though, on the responses, was that because there was a land availability sort of consultation, or what, I can't remember exactly the exact terminology for it, but that was done at the same time as the issues and options paper. But did we have a far better response on the land availability than the issues and options paper?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McNally. Yes, we did. I haven't got the exact figure to hand, but I think we're up to around about 400 responses, and that's 400 individual pieces of land. So some landowners will have put through 3, 4, 5 or 6 pieces of land they might own. Excuse me. But yeah, I think it was around about 400 responses for that exercise. Yeah. But it was, you're quite right, it was carried out at the same time, partly for efficiency reasons, but partly to actually try and get people interested. So there were two things going on. We knew from past experience that there was a lot of interest in the call for land exercise, so it's to try and maybe get them interested in the issues and options that was going on at the same time as well. Thank you.
It's just interesting to see that when it actually affects you, or you've got a sort of an interest in it, your responses seem to be far quicker in coming forward than anything else. And the problem is a lot of people don't respond because they don't feel it affects them. But then 5 years later on down the line, they realise actually they should have responded. So it's just one of them things.
Thank you. And Councillor Dennis, please.
Yes, I empathise with the officer. But don't be too disappointed, because I don't think you need to be disappointed. Beg your pardon. I think that's par for the course when it comes to consultation. You know, and I think you did what you could. It is soul destroying, the responses you get from consultation. You will find that should we make decisions from the consultation, and the people that don't agree, the percentage will significantly change very quickly, because it seems to be when you're trying to get a measure of things, you don't get any response. When you've responded to the response you get and people don't agree with it, then it seems to attack you then. So if people seem to be more reactive than, or inactive at the moment, then become reactive. So it's very difficult. It's not a job. I empathise with your problems, but it is we all as councillors have been to consultations in different places in town halls and shopping centres, and it is a bit of a soul destroying operation. But thank you, and thank you for your help. A good paper, thank you.
I think you make a good point, Councillor Dennis. Members of the public, parish councils and consultees, I think, look at consultations that other authorities are doing and think, why should I bother? They've already made up their mind. And then we look at a consultation such as this and think, why should we bother? Because no one replied. But genuinely, no one can say, no community, no parish council can say that they were not consulted at this stage. I know the amount of communication that went out there. I know that ward councillors across the council were assiduous in encouraging parish councils to reply and to have their penneth worth. But just on that, when do we expect this to come forward to this committee for the decision-making element of issues and options?
I can't give you any firm assurances, Chairman, on that, partly because it's, as I mentioned before, it's not just the issues and options which feed into this. So when I say we're going to bring you options for a housing strategy, we need to also look at the housing need assessments that we've had done. We look at the economic viability assessments that have been done and the requirements on those. We also look at the strategic flood risk assessment as well, which we're currently sort of setting down that path on, which obviously forms an important part of evidence as to how we can look at managed growth in coastal areas, in the high flood risk areas. So we have to actually pull all of that together. So, and obviously with this only being 61 respondents in itself, it's, as we said, difficult to actually claim that that's fully representative, and that's why we have to make sure that we've pulled in all this extra evidence and pulled it all together to then look at what's the most appropriate options for a strategy going forwards. That said, we are aiming to have something to bring back to committee in relation to that, as I say, towards early autumn. So we're looking towards September, October time, when that's the intention, and that's the aim, to have something tangible to bring back to committee to certainly give us a strong steer on which direction we should be moving towards in terms of the housing strategy.
Thank you very much. So I'd say to colleagues, that will be the important one, where we will be needing to get to grips with those issues and options, and we'll have discussions around that as to trying to bring in at least the views of our district colleagues more broadly than this committee, because at the end of the day, what I have said all the way through is that this plan needs to be reflective of local needs. It needs to be reflective of the district as a whole. It needs to be reflective of the priorities of the district. And in many senses, those are also going to be the priorities of district councillors as local representatives of that. And it's important that we end up with a plan from beginning to end, and the issues and options is as fundamental a part of the beginning as we're going to get. We need a plan that from beginning to end has a much broader base of support and engagement than the one that we've currently working with, so that members at least and communities out there cannot so readily complain that the plan does not reflect their needs and priorities. Has anyone got any other point that they'd like to raise on issues and options? Seeing no one, I'm happy to regard this as noted, which is what we're required to do. We're not required to take a vote on it. And thank you again, Simon, for that paper. Thank you for the work that you've done on issues and options, and for going out there to the communities and trying to push this as hard as what you have done. And it's absolutely no reflection on your efforts or the efforts of any one of your team that there's only 61 responses. I think that is, as you've said very clearly, just the nature of the beast when it comes to consultation. So thank you very much for that, and we'll move on to item 7, which is housing supply. And again, I'll hand back over to you, Simon, to take us through the paper.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for those words. I'll relay that back to the team. It's been a hard slog getting it all done, so they'll be pleased that certainly it's been appreciated. Thank you. Yes, so the next paper just reports the 5-year housing supply calculation that we have to carry out on an annual basis. It's a requirement for us to do this. It's in the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 73, which says we must identify and update annually a supply of specific deliverable sites sufficient to provide a minimum of 5 years worth of housing. So there's some key words in there. Deliverable is a key word. So we have to make sure that we have enough planning permissions for a number of houses to meet what we need for the next 5-year period. So the local plan sets out how many we need over the entire plan period, and we have to keep a rolling record for every 5 years. The report also introduces the outcomes of the housing delivery test. It was something that was introduced in 2018, and we've had 2 or 3 now that have actually been produced. This is something that's actually produced centrally. So all we do is feedback how many houses we've actually built. They only want to know how many completions we've had. There's a central government figure that says you should build this many, and they look at how many we've built against how many they say we should have built, and that produces a percentage. As it says there in 1.5, the pass rate effectively is, which is what they call it, is 95%. So you have to have built 95% of the housing that you actually need. It's actually averaged over a 3-year period. So they take the completions for the last 3 years, average it out, and the need over the last 3 years and average it out. And that actually helps to eradicate blips and smooth out blips. I hate to refer as COVID as a blip, and that's certainly not being derisory over it, but the intention of having a 3-year period is to try and smooth out things like that, because inevitably you're going to have years where you have something that depresses housing. You're going to have years where suddenly completions shoot up. So that's the idea of that 3-year period. And what that will do is help over COVID to give us a bit of a truer picture, hopefully. And over the 3 years, as we go further on, we'll start to see whether those completions are still coming forwards or whether they increase. If you drop below certain levels, the graphic there quite nicely illustrates that. If you drop below certain levels, then you start to get into trouble, effectively. Drop below 95% and you have to produce an action plan as a council, which shows how are you going to deal with this. You're not building enough houses. If you drop below 85%, because we are now in the later stages, if you drop below 85%, what happens is you then have to use the 20% buffer for the 5-year housing supply. I'll move on to 5-year housing supply now, and then I can just explain a bit more about what that means for those that aren't aware of it. So the government requires us to actually have a 5-year housing supply, but we have to have a 5% buffer just in case some of those don't actually come forwards. And the 5% is standard. So if you're performing okay, if you're building enough houses, then you can just use the 5% to make sure that you've got enough supply, enough permissions, plus a little bit extra in case some of those permissions don't actually come forwards. If you're failing to actually deliver enough housing and you're slipping below those percentages I mentioned before, 75%, 75%, yeah, then you actually have to apply a 20% buffer. So you not only have to show that you've got enough housing supply for your need, but you've also got to show you've got an additional number of housing permissions to cover another 20% need, to make sure that you're covering, because clearly you're not building enough. So the idea is that you need to make sure you've got more permissions to get enough of them built. What that actually means in reality on the ground is there's a test in the National Planning Policy Framework. It's referred to as the tilted balance. I think it's in paragraph 11. But if you start to underperform as an authority and the 20% buffer applies, you actually have to be a lot more flexible in terms of what you approve in terms of housing developments. So the test for a refusal of a planning permission gets a lot stricter. And what you'll end up doing potentially as a local planning authority is approving housing schemes that you potentially wouldn't have approved before because the quality wasn't good enough. For example, the layout is a bit cramped. You might have wanted to refuse it from a design aesthetic point of view. But if you're in a 20% buffer, if you're in what's effectively special measures, you're actually being forced into a position where, as a council, you're having to approve those permissions, and you end up with lower quality, potentially lower quality housing developments as a result, because effectively you need these houses irrespective of that. So it's really important for us to stay above that 5-year housing supply, to stay above that percentage in the housing delivery test as well as a local authority. Really important. Otherwise, we find ourselves in a tricky position when we're looking at housing applications. So to move on to some actual figures, in 2.3, the 5-year supply is actually good at the moment. Anecdotally, throughout the last 12 months to 18 months, as an authority, we haven't seen a significant drop in planning applications and approvals and completions. We have seen a drop. For an example, we would normally maybe approve, we would normally complete 40, 50 houses in a month. There was 1 month when lockdown first kicked in where we built 2. So obviously there were impacts, and as a result, our completions have dipped, and as a result, we have approved less houses along the way. But we are still in a very robust position at 6.06 years supply. So we have still approved quite a lot of sites. There's been some big approvals for big housing developments. Some of them will have already been on the books, and they've just carried on through the pandemic and got those approvals on the way through. But you can see we are in a robust position there. We do go through and look at the permissions we've got. We try and cleanse it and remove any permissions that are getting old or aren't likely to come forwards as well. Because we don't want a permission on there that's been around for 20 years and nothing's happened on it, because if it's not come forward in the last 20 years, probably not going to come forward in the next 5 years. So we do proactively talk to developers, landowners, get a feel for what's going on the ground and when permissions are likely to come forwards, just so it is a realistic figure on there. And if you remember at the start, the NPPF says it has to be deliverable. So as I say, we need to make sure these permissions are going to come forward in that 5-year period. So we're okay with the 5-year supply. Moving down into section 3.1, the housing delivery test. You can see there the housing delivery test does run in arrears. So the latest period there is 2017 to 2020, highlighted in yellow. And you can see we are well above the 95% pass rate, as we were last reporting period as well, at 109%. So our completions, based on what the government says we should be building, are good. Our local plan effectively has a higher target. We said, actually, in our local plan, we want to try and build more than that. And there's nothing wrong with that approach. But in terms of the metrics that the government look at, we're performing well on that. So combining the 5-year supply and the housing delivery test figures together, we're in a strong position. We are only a 5% buffer authority based on that. My view and the view that I would defend at appeal, etc., is that we are a 5% authority based on those figures, and there's no need for us to have a 20% buffer, an action plan or anything like that. So a robust position at the moment. How that will pan out over the next 12 months and through the recovery and anything else that might occur, that does remain to be seen. Obviously, we will continue to monitor it, and I think it's an even better time now to actually talk to developers and landowners to find out what their intentions are now moving forwards, because the last 18 months have been will have produced a lot of uncertainty for them. So there's still work to be done on that going forward into the next period, just to make sure we're on top of it. Section 3.3. Just for interest, gives you a comparison against our sort of local neighbours there. I won't go through them all. You can see all those figures. It's just for an indication as to how we're performing against others in the area. And as I mentioned there in 3.4, the next reporting period, usually it's towards the end of the year, so towards the end of 2021. I won't bring a report back based on that. I'll do it the same way I've done it this year. However, I will update separately once we know what that housing delivery target figure is for this next period, and let members know that. Section 4 just explains the risks that I've already explained to you about us going into action plan measures if we're not careful, so I won't go through that again. And I've already effectively summed up the conclusion as to us being in a robust position, and we've got a good margin on both of those. So that's all I've got to say on that. So I'll hand back to you if that's okay. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. I would say that this represents incredibly good news. I think it's a vote of confidence in the district, a vote of confidence in the district's economy. And it's good news, which at one time I would never have dreamed of sitting here and being able to read. Because when we adopted the local plan, and if you look back on page 52 there on the chart at the top, back in 2018-19, we only had a 5.42 years supply of housing. And the great fear was with having adopted local plan with its allocations. It's one thing allocating land for housing, it's another persuading builders to build them and people to buy them. And the great risk we had was that simply demand would not be there to build out the number of houses to keep us with a meeting the housing delivery test and to sustain a 5-year forward supply. And the result of that would be, once again, a free-for-all. So the fact that we are exceeding our targets by 35% with 130% pass on our housing delivery test is really, really good. It's really encouraging that there is sufficient demand, and that demand doesn't come without people wanting to live here, and they don't want to live here unless they can be employed here. So all of that points to things going in the right direction. It's interesting, though, having said that our performance feels to me to be as much reflective of overall trends across Lincolnshire. It points to a buoyant Lincolnshire and a growing Lincolnshire. Simply when you look at the chart there on page 52 to 53, comparing to other local authorities, that actually across Lincolnshire, with only a couple of notable exceptions, local plans and planning authorities are all of them, nearly all of them, exceeding by some distance their housing delivery test requirements. I don't know how on earth South Stephen is performing, or certainly previously performed quite poorly and still is doing relatively poorly, given that they have excellent road and rail connectivity to the rest of the country, to London, to the Midlands, and elsewhere. And I imagine down there, land values and everything else should be sufficiently punchy to sustain their growth, or to sustain housing growth. But among that table, it's interesting to note that we are still, even with a really good result relative to the rest of Lincolnshire, the growth still isn't quite as robust here as it is elsewhere. But appreciating the challenges that we know we have, which we knew we had when we adopted the local plan, which in a way underpinned the fears we had at that time, they are still there in terms of connectivity. And rurality and distances to either outside of East Lindsey or to employment centres beyond. But still, we are in a fantastic position compared to where I thought we might have been at this point. So a genuine credit to everyone involved. I'm happy to open it up if anyone has any comments or debate that they'd like to make. Councillor McNally, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one. With the box 2 commitments, the inland dwelling commitments was 3,200 and the deliverability is 2,100, and the same with coastal, 900 to 400. The commitments, I presuming, am I right in saying that that's from the allocations within the local plan and the deliverability is like a recently up to date sort of figure?
Yeah, so a commitment is different to what's deliverable in terms of a 5-year supply. So as I mentioned, we will have a commitment that has maybe got permission and has a start on it, but there's no indication from the developer they're likely to bring it forward anytime soon. So a commitment will sit there. Older commitments are removed when they get very old. We have some permissions on there from the 1970s, which the commitment has been removed because realistically it's potentially a dead in the water permission, but it is still an extant permission. So the commitment is different to what we can consider as a deliverable site as part of the 5-year supply.
Just out of interest, is on the difference is on the deliverability, but some of that will be, I presume, the houses that have been built as well, or not?
No, if you've got a housing site for 100 houses, then initially 100 houses would go into the 5-year supply. As that starts to be built and completed, those start to be removed because they've already been built. They can't be counted as part of the supply, the new supply. So that figure's reduced as the houses are built. So they will come out of the supply. I think that's what you mean.
I'm not sure. So I'm saying when they're being built, the deliverability goes lower.
Yes, well, yeah. As a site's being built out, it will the numbers of deliverable houses on that site will reduce. Yeah.
Have we got a figure for the house so we can see what have been built and what actually has been lost in the ether, so to speak? So the inland commitments are 3,200. The inland deliverable ones are 2,100. So it'd just be interesting to know if actually 1,000 houses have been built or whether it's only 500 houses and 500 houses are sort of lost because it's been that long.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head whether I can extract that information. It is a combination of those and other things. Those issues as to why they would be removed. I'm not sure how easy it is to pull out, whether it's even possible to pull out that level of information from the spreadsheets that we use. I would have to have a look for you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much for that, Simon, and members. Once again, I think it's a really good place for us to be in because it means that at least our local plan, once it is up for review, remains sound in terms of housing supply. That brings us to the end of our formal business for this afternoon. We don't have it on. Didn't see it on the agenda. Date and time of next. Yes, we do have the date and time of the next meeting. The next date that we have is 23rd of September. Now that is looking like it's going to cause diary clashes with one or two other things that are going on. Would members be comfortable with that going back a week to Thursday the 30th instead of Thursday the 23rd? Would you be happy with that?
I'm away from the 9th to the 29th, so I'd really relish a policy meeting day after my holidays.
Then
I'm quite happy.
I think we can be happy to oblige.
Yeah, I think I'll be happy.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'll be away. So that's not.
Thank you. In which case, date and time of next meeting will be Thursday, the 30th. Did I say the 29th? I meant Thursday the 30th, which will give you an extra day, all being well.
Absolutely, thank you.
But thank you very much for that. In which case, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have safe journeys back to wherever you're going. Enjoy your company once again, and I'm happy to declare